All right. This room is full tonight, which is awesome to see all your faces here tonight. Thanks, Olive Garden, for sponsoring our meal tonight. I can't wait to eat mine. It's going to be delicious. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that tonight. And okay, news. Sledding is obviously not happening in March because we have no snow. That was our hope, was a sledding party. But so far, no sledding unless something changes. Um, Donation. We got a $250 donation from Good Shepherd to the association within the last month. So awesome. That could go towards food and childcare for another meeting. So exciting stuff around that. I think that's, dues. If you haven't paid your dues, Michaela, Treasurer Michaela, raise your hand, like for real. Okay, because we have teachers here, right? Like people in education. So you can pay your $20 dues to Michaela tonight, cash, check. If you need a Venmo option, we'll make that work and we'll cut the check or the cash to her for that. So we can make that happen to Leslie Reisenhauer or Leslie Piercy. Can take those. Amber is going to introduce our speakers tonight.
So also, we have a door prize thing. So I think most of you guys have, I hate being on camera. Most of you guys have signed up, but you haven't. If you haven't, just make sure that you put your name in there. And George and Kelly are also going to donate from the Church of First Love, one of our meals in the next coming future. So there has been talk multiple times, like what we want the speakers to talk about, and school as a topic has came up multiple times. So I asked these beautiful ladies to talk a little bit about the school and how we can deal with the foster kids at home and with the school working together. Tracy is a social worker and Tara is soon to be my relative, I just want to say. She is a learning development designer, inventor, right? Something. She's way too smart for my knowledge. So these guys are going to talk about filling the gap between home and school. Who wants to go first?
Okay. So yes, we are going to try to talk through that, and we're going to thread some stories in about what things might look like at school for some of the students or kids, and then what that might translate into practice at home. So to introduce myself, Tara Olson, these are my kiddos. So I started out teaching in at the Boys Ranch. This is kind of weird. I was just telling Amber, like I could see my history of teaching happening here because I was at the Boys Ranch first, and then I was at BHS with someone's mom over here, and then I was with Melissa at Horizon. So I've seen from a residential perspective through my role as a special education teacher and then also as a gen ed classroom teacher, the impacts that education has. And then this year's my family. And then a few of them have some special needs in terms of health. So I've also seen how the system can impact our work as parents. So.
Okay, and my name is Tracy Famius, and I've been a social worker with the district for 30 years. It's a really hard number to let roll out of my mouth. And prior to that, I worked at Manchester for a few years. And so I've got a little bit of that residential care background and just a lot of years working with students and with families and with other educators and agencies. And this is my why. This is my family that every day when I head out the door, I try to keep them in mind, that every child that I come in contact is somebody's child. And just to remember that and come from a good place of how would I want my child to be taken care of during the day. So that's the why I carry with me.
So questions that we want to hopefully answer today, and we will have time for questions at the end. If you want, we have sticky notes and if you want to jot them down so you don't forget them. But we want to talk about what school might look like and feel like for students. How might relationships be impacted both in school and out of school? And then how to support and partner with schools in learning.
And you'll hear us say a lot, like what we know. And when we say what we know, it's what we've learned from trainings and what we've learned from research. So just kind of perspective on that. And certainly don't think either one of us are experts, okay? But we're just here to share with you some of the training pieces that we've participated with, that a lot of our educators, teachers have participated in, and things that we find that help students at school. And a big resource for this presentation, actually, Leslie Piercy, could you please hold up that book in front of you? I'm sorry, I know you're eating. The Connected Child. Has anybody read this book? Can I just see real high how many people have? Okay, so a lot of what you're going to see today, we have taken as a BPS district and implemented into our trauma-informed practices. There's several books that I have found extremely helpful. That one changed the way I did my work. So just really impactful things from that book. So we're going to start by sharing with you a video about building adult capabilities, and just knowing that whether we do the job that Tara and I do, or whether we're a classroom teacher, or whether we are a foster parent, a guardian, regardless, community agency, it takes all of us coming together to support kids. So this is about building adult capabilities.
The social challenges that face modern societies, whether it's the ability to work productively, to be a good citizen, stay healthy, have their roots in early health and development. A strong foundation in early childhood results in much better and more effective development later. A weak foundation really puts us behind. The most important thing children need to thrive is to live in an environment of relationships that begins in their family, but also extends out to include adults who are family members in child care centers and other programs. What children need is for that entire environment of relationships to be invested in their healthy development. We've shown from decades of testing interventions that we can improve outcomes. But the magnitude of those impacts is not good enough. Science is now available to help us think about what we might do that would have a bigger impact than the best of what we've done before. So we began to ask, what could we be doing differently? What could we do to be smarter? Children who are at the greatest risk for the poorest outcomes in learning and health and behavior are children who experience a pileup, the cumulative burden of one after another of risk factors. And then the burden is more than any child could be expected to overcome. So we began to focus on the development of the adults. What could we be doing to strengthen the capacity of everyone who interacts with children? This led us to think about the kinds of skills you need to deal with adversity. These skills of focusing attention, planning, monitoring, delaying gratification, being able to solve problems, being able to work in teams, executive function and self-regulation. They're also the kind of skills you need to create a well-regulated home and school environment in which healthy development and learning can take place. And then brain science started to tell us that differences in those skills start to develop in infancy based on the environment kids live in. So how do those skills get built? Well, if you don't develop them early, how do you develop them later? Actually, you can build them later because the period of flexibility and plasticity for this part of the brain doesn't fully mature until age 25 to 30. And then the light bulb went on. The reason we're not getting a bigger impact is not because we don't know about how to influence development, but because we're giving information and advice to people who we need to do active skill building with. Skill building by coaching, by training, by practice, but we're not doing that. So we now have developed this theory of change that says we need to focus on the development of the adults who are important in kids' lives.
So try this.
How does that work?
That's a new idea. Buen trabajo.
We need to focus on their skills, their needs, in order for them to be better, more effective parents, in order for them to be better prepared to be employable, which would enhance the economic stability of the family, which is also good for children. Second of all, we looked at many people in preschool programs and childcare centers. And we said, what are we doing to build those skills in the providers? They need skill building as well. And also the community can help to build and reinforce the capacities that parents need. And the community also includes programs in which the people who work in the programs have sufficient skills. Third of all, what are the major sources of toxic stress in this community, and how can we reduce them? Moving it up to a policy level, how are our policies strengthening communities' abilities to reduce source of toxic stress and caregivers' abilities to provide what kids need? The development of our human capital is our future. The development of a productive workforce is our future. The development of a healthy population is our future. This kind of future orientation is critical for healthy society. It's critical for a thriving business. It's critical for successful environmental relationships to raise children. It's all about being able to plan for the future, to have a future. And that's why this is so important.
Okay, so as Leslie switches us back to the PowerPoint, two big things out of that video. It really talks about how we all together work to support kids. But the two things that we're really going to focus on is the adult skill building. So I, in my job, can't help support a student if I don't know the skills myself. And I think it's such a great video or visual how we used to just hand out pamphlets to people, right, and give information, but to actually skill build. I need to know it first so that I can carry that through with the child. So that's kind of the one thing we want to build on. The second one is we're going to touch a little bit on brain development and how new research is telling that brain continues to learn, right? So if we've experienced some tough stuff, some trauma in those really early years, that we can change the brain. It can be rewired. So we're going to touch on that a little bit also. So you each have, we work in education, so we like to do little activities. So you have a sticky pad in front of you, and there should be pencils at your table. If everybody could grab one sticky note and a pencil. Okay, on your sticky note, I want you to write down the 5 things in life that keep you the most connected. What do you get out of bed for each day? What means more to you than anything else on this earth? Your top 5. Okay, so we all from time to time work with youth who have experienced some really tough stuff that we often refer to as childhood trauma. Okay, so this exercise is about what it feels like to experience trauma. So what I want you to do is I want you to cross off number 5 on your list, because I just took number 5 away from you. Now I want you to cross off number 1. And anybody willing to share with us, like, what kind of feelings you have right now that you've lost those 2 things from your life? Right? Okay. Anybody else? A feeling? Right? Now I want you to pick one to cross off. What are some feelings that you feel now? Yep. Lonely, sad. A lot of times people say helpless. And that's how our kids feel when they've experienced some really tough trauma. And so it's an exercise we do when we talk about filling the gaps. We're going to share with you things we do at school to help us learn, to try to have perspective, and things that we've learned that help kids when they are dysregulated. And so this is an activity we do to try to have some empathy, walk in the shoes, and try to experience what must childhood trauma look like. Okay, you can take all 5 of those things back. They're back in your lives. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the brain. Now, neither one of us are neurologists, right? But we can share with you a little bit about what we know. So we have a baby in the room tonight. How many of you have babies in the home? Okay, so what do we know about the brain? Couple things that impact development. Of course, biological factors, as during that pregnancy, right? What kind of things are happening if that mother is experiencing a lot of stress, emotional kinds of things, or exposure to other kinds of toxins. Of course, that impacts the development of the baby. Malnutrition and of course, alcohol and drugs we know have a significant impact on the development of that child. But also we have environmental factors that impact development as well. Okay, so the brain. Here's how we teach the brain to kids at school. So the brain, this is my fist, right? All feelings live in my thumb. That's all that happens in my thumb is feelings. Learning happens in my fingers. Okay, so feelings, learning. So when I go about my day, right, and I start to have strong feelings, what happens to my learning? It's disrupted. So I need to settle my feelings so that I can learn. If I'm a teacher and I have a student doing this, I'm just words. I'm just talking. They're not learning. We have to regulate and help kids regulate so that they can learn. Also, if I'm dysregulated, the kid's going to match me or beat me, I'll guarantee you. So whether I speak from the role of a parent or working with kids in schools, I have to be regulated so that I can help that child as well. So at birth, that brain is underdeveloped and it grows the most from birth to age 5. So that's a little daunting for us. Like I start working with kids when they're in kindergarten. So a lot of that brain development, it learns the quickest from birth to 5. And the brain is very spongy, like a sponge. And it soaks up everything in the environment. So when a baby cries, what do? We soothe them, right? How do we try to soothe? Pick them up, we feed them, we rock them. What are we trying to figure out? What they need, right? So every time as the adult, when that baby cries and I respond, now that brain is making connections, and that's how the brain learns. And the more consistently that adult responds, the stronger those connections become. And that's how the brain learns. When I respond consistently, that child also learns I can trust in adults to meet my needs. So really simple games that we play with babies like peekaboo, right? They really are helping that brain learn and make connections because even though you can't see me, right, I'm still here. That brain learns to trust adults. Okay, but if the flip side happens, baby cries and I don't respond, that same sponginess is what makes really young kids very susceptible to trauma, particularly domestic violence. Okay, so that same sponginess that helps the brain learn, that also impacts the brain negatively. So if I, as the caretaker, don't respond, those connections aren't made. Or if I respond inconsistently, they don't get strong. Okay, so that early development of the brain is critical. So to develop attachment, what we really want to focus on, knowing from our video, the brain can continue to learn and we can rewire the brain. So we want to focus on affection and kindness. Rules, structures, boundaries. Rules are good. Are we all Bismarck Public Schools? Or are we from different districts? Every single one of your schools in Bismarck have school-wide rules and expectations. Rules are a good thing. They define our space, they define expectations. And so when we teach rules and expectations, kids know what's expected. They know what we need. So they're a good thing, provide structure. Exercise and sensory, we know we need to give opportunities for kids to move. But movement, a lot of times, especially when they're dysregulated, we wouldn't say, go out on the playground and run, or take them to the gym and just run. But movement with a purpose. movement so that we can self-regulate and calm. Cuddling, feeding, rocking. We're going to share a visual with you. You have it on the table. It's not real great, but we'll show it to you. Lessons in like we're together. A lot of times our kids who've experienced tough stuff feel like the adults are upset or angry with them. And so we're here to support you.
So this is a handout that you do have at your table, and I believe we emailed them, so they should get emailed out to all of you. I think this is particularly important to me when I was working at the middle and high school level. It's sometimes easier with smaller children to figure out when they're dysregulated because when they're acting out or crying or yelling. At the high school, middle school level, we get a lot more internalizing, and a lot of assumptions are made and people go right to the ADHD. So this could be a great tool to start some conversations if you are working with teachers, because to assume all teachers have a good level of knowledge or understanding about this would be false. So, and especially at the secondary level, because they're trained in content, not so much in children. So it's okay to have a tool and bring this in and have conversation with them about what are you actually seeing in the classroom. And then you can help connect that back for them, so that they too are aware that they might need to check themselves and be a little more patient with the students in front of them.
Like it's a really important tool. Like a lot of times we'll have kids that will be taken in to see somebody, right? A doctor for diagnosis or something like that. And that person that they're with can only go by what's reported, right? And a lot of times what's reported are just these behaviors over here. And so our kids who experience significant trauma often come out with diagnoses of ADHD or oppositional defiant. And then they end up getting medicated for that when it's really could be trauma that's going on.
An example of what Tracy just described, we got a student at the middle school I was working at, and on the outset, he looked just extremely ADHD. He couldn't sit still. He'd be laying on the floor, rolling pencils. I'm talking 8th grade. So he would purposefully walk around and turn chairs over. And as we started to learn more about him, learned that he lived in a car and he didn't know even what car that would be that evening. And so even later on, when he did finally get into some housing, we still saw the behaviors. It doesn't just instantly change, but it did make a difference once that teacher who was expressing so much frustration realized that it wasn't about her. And that's important to bring back to this.
Okay, so we're going to share with you a little more about the brain. So when we have kids, right, go ahead and click, that are in their downstairs brain, and that's what we call it with kids. We're in their downstairs brain when they're dysregulated. Go ahead. And one more. Okay, what they need is they need safety and that they need to regulate. So my job is to help that child. As the adult, my job is to help them feel safe and to calm down. Now, a lot of times when kids are that low in their brain stem, they feel what's almost equivalent to terror. And this is where we will a lot of times see some major shutdown or some pretty significant behavior. Okay, so let's say this student in a classroom flipped a chair. This is not the time I'm going to talk to them about flipping that chair. We're going to get to it because kids need to have expectations. And like I said, we need to have rules and expectations. But what do you think would happen if I start talking to a student when they're way down here? It's going to get worse, I guarantee you, right? And the more I talk, right, it's my biggest downfall with kids is I talk too much, particularly when they're dysregulated. So I need to help them to feel safe and help them to regulate. Okay, when they come up a little bit and they're in their midbrain, now they need some movement. My job as the adult is to relate with them. We're okay. I know you here. but I need to offer that child some movement. So this is where we would do some of our, what we call school moves, or some sensory kinds of things. So you might have heard like wall push-ups or the pretzels, or ask your kids, what do you learn in school about that? There's all kinds of little roll-ups on your ears, or the finger presses around your palm. They should know these from school. And that's what I mean when I say movement with a purpose. They are ways to self-regulate and calm. The stress balls, right? And people have their favorites. We never, ever, ever called them toys. Every classroom in Bismarck Public Schools Elementary School has a self-regulation tool kit that we train the adults, skill build with the adults first, and then we train with the kids. If we call them toys, and Tara's going to talk about this in a little bit, they'll treat them like toys. Okay, but that's a great question. So we have schools that have sensory rooms, and those are great. And those are for students who have high, high, high needs for sensory input. So what we found is if I have a student who's dysregulated in the classroom, right, and I as the social worker am called to help support, if I take that child out and take them to my office, I'm going to get them to calm down, right? Because I've just removed probably 20 kids that were an audience. But here's the thing, that child's not going to learn from me in my office, right? And I always tell teachers, the last thing you want is this person teaching your kids math, okay? You don't want that. So we push self-regulation tools into classrooms and calming space in classrooms. So students, before they get way down here, start to get agitated, go take a break. It's okay, not in trouble. Take a break, get your tool, get your timer, and they can still hear that instruction that's going on in the classroom. Okay. So when we move up a little bit into limbic system, now they need emotional engagement, and my job is to continue to relate. This is where that piece comes in, where they often think we're angry with them. It's okay. We're okay here. We're just going to calm, and we're going to get you back up to where you need to be. Now, I still at this point have not talked about that chair flipping. Right? So now when they get up into their upstairs brain and we are now calm, now they can learn because they've calmed their feelings. And I, as the adult, can reason with them. Now we can talk about what happened, that we flipped that chair. And at some point, there's probably going to be some consequences for that, right? That's not a safe behavior. We've got other kids in classrooms, but I'm not going to have that conversation until they're up here and they are in their upstairs brain.
So it's never too late. That's the thing. People, especially when we work with older kids, people think that's just it. But it's never too late to heal the brain. Traumatized children can learn ways of relating and responding. A lot of it is how we respond to them. Rational thought and self-awareness, that's where we come in, being the adult in this situation, and then being aware of the time. It takes time and it takes consistency to rebuild those connections. This one, you have a really horrible handout. I tried to print it 2 different ways and the bottom row just does not show up, but again, it'll be emailed to you.
So that really connects with that other brain visual that we just walked through. So what it'll lay out is just the different parts of brain regions, what the function or the purpose of that part of the brain is, critical period of development, and then experiences needed. So at this age, to develop this part of the brain to the best of its ability, here's what this child needs, okay? When is it functionally mature? And then what are some interventions? So if we have a student who's often down in here, we'll jump over here to see, well, what kind of interventions can we put in place to help support that child and rewire that brain? Now, if we have kids that are often dysregulated and easily triggered, a lot of the interventions, rocking, swinging, deep breathing, chewing. They're very primal, right? And a lot of it is replicating things that would typically happen in infancy. Okay. So just kind of guides us, helps us at schools when we're trying to figure out even a behavior plan, maybe, right? To see what kind of things are we going to need to put in place to prevent behavior from happening. Okay, this is a visual that we use pre-K 12, so preschool through high school. And this is what we provide in schools to our students. And it's called our multi-tiered continuum of support. So thinking about what we do at school, what are some things you could implement in the home, or even just be aware that these things are supports available in the school. So everything in the blue are things that we provide to all kids. And we call that area sense of belonging. So it's your relationship building, your school connectedness, safety. Tara's going to talk to us about safety in a little bit, and staff wellness, adult wellness. If we're not good, we're going to have a hard time supporting our kids. So these are the things that make us want to show up every day. These are the things that help kids to want to be at school. All kids. Tier 1, that's the core. These are things, again, that are provided to all students. So we have our rules and expectations. We have a core curriculum. We teach behavior in school the same way we teach reading and we teach math. There's dedicated time to teach those behavior skills. We focus on self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, self-management, social awareness. Those are our 5. But our core curriculum that teaches behavior, taught by classroom teachers to all students. Celebrate. We try to recognize the good. How many of you who have kids in school have got a catch them being good slip come home? Oh, wonderful. We try to acknowledge positive behavior as much as we can. And then you'll see throughout here the words teaching and reteaching. How many of you have made a mistake today? I have probably made many. So kids are going to make mistakes, and we know that. And they're going to make mistakes with behavior. And we come from the perspective that we're going to teach, and then we're going to reteach, and we're going to teach, and we're going to reteach, especially for students who've experienced some significant trauma. They have a difficult time with long-term memory and verbal skills, okay? So that's for all students. The yellow is for some students who need a little more of that green. And then we provide those interventions mostly through small group and individual support. Anybody in here have a student receiving check-in, check-out? It's our best, most effective tier 2 intervention because it gives kids attention at the beginning of the day, throughout the day, and then at the end of the day. So if we have kids that are acting in ways to get attention, we're going to give it to them so they don't have to act in negative ways to get it. Okay? Tier 2, kids that need a little more of the core. Okay, yes, so kids who, this here, if we have high fidelity to blue and green, that should meet the needs of 80% of our students. Yellows for about 12 to 15%. So check in, check out, it's usually if somebody needs more, we go to check in, check out. So if I'm running that program, I would meet with Tara in the morning and we would go over her goals. The goals are typically those school-wide rules and expectations. Here's what you're working on today, just kind of pump her up for the day. And she's going to have a little sheet that has her goals on it, and it's going to be broken down into time frames throughout the day. So she's going to go about her day, and she's going to take that sheet with her. Most kids love the sheet. When I was at Moses, we had folders. I had kids come and ask me, can I get a folder? Most of them just absolutely love the intervention. So Tara's going to go throughout her day, and at the end of each of those time periods, it's usually a half hour, the teacher's going to come over and say, hey, how do you think it's going? You did really well with this, this, and this. And then she's going to circle, either a 0, 1, or 2 or a 1, 2, 3. Schools do it a little different. So her whole day, she gets that feedback. And then at the end of the day, she's going to come back to me and we're going to figure out her percentage for the day. And, you know, a lot of kids do extremely, extremely well. And so it's a way to pump them up before they go home. And if she didn't have such a great day, okay, we're just going to talk about it. But tomorrow is a new day. It's done and over. Tomorrow we start over again. And then somehow communication goes home to the parent so they know how they did in their check-in, check-out time. Okay, so then that's tier 2 for some. And that's great. We don't ask for parents to do that reinforcement at home, but when they do, it just makes it much more effective intervention to have that home to school connection. Yeah. Then tier 3 are for our students, and this is for about 5 to 7% of our student population in a building who just need much more intensive intervention. And typically that's going to be through a pretty structured behavior intervention plan. Okay, so we're just going to stop and see if you guys have any other questions at this point, but this is a system that's in place at all of our schools. We want to catch when kids need tier 2 really quickly. We don't want them to struggle.
Yeah, an example of that kind of movement between tier 1 and tier 2, one of the middle schools we're working with, they started to notice an increase in some behaviors that were happening shortly before Christmas. And so as a team, they went through all of the students by name. And if a teacher couldn't say 4 cool things about that student, they adopted them. So each of the teachers ended up taking and connecting with these students. Behaviors went down, continued to go down through January, which is unusual because that's usually when we're seeing that. But that power of connection and somebody just taking a moment to know you is huge. But those are things that we try so that we kind of keep our kids, notice where we need to do the reteaching, but really celebrate when we can catch that happening. Yep, on our website, and there's a link in here, and I'll share that so that everyone can go to it. But we do have an MTSS section that will show this, and it also shows the academic intervention piece with some definitions. And to be clear, we know this is a weakness of us as a district, is building those communication pages. So that is work that's kind of in progress so that we can be more clear about the terminology and bridge that education parent gap.
Yes, and before I forget, back to check in, check out. The person who facilitates and meets with the child begin and end of day should not be classroom teacher. Okay, because we really want to build other relationships outside of that classroom teacher. So it's a really good question. And the more supports we can get into schools, the more support we have for kids. But where we really need to focus, and this is something that even a lot of our staff have a hard time with, we need to focus right here. Because if we don't, right, if we don't have high fidelity to our blue and our green, we're going to have more kids that need tier 2 and more kids that need tier 3. And just like you're saying, we're not going to have the supports for them. Right here, high fidelity, 80% of your student population. I do think we've made a lot of growth in the district. When I first started, I was one of 5 social workers in the district. We now have, don't hold me to this, but I want to say 26. So as we can, the district has been onboarding more staff. The other thing that's been happening is more training for our instructional aides. And we had a big training at the beginning of the year this year. And just this week, we're planning one for next year as well, and trying to get more information into even our playground supervisors. Like, they're the ones that are out there that are dealing with some of the bigger issues when kids are trying to negotiate and problem solve. And if we haven't taught them, if we haven't builded with them, I don't think that's a word, then they're not going to be able to transfer those skills. But definitely something that we always want to grow in to try to have more staff to support kids.
There it is. Okay, so this is that psychological safety that we were talking about, and this is the importance of kids being seen. So I kind of alluded to that in at the middle school. There was kids who did not feel seen, so we had to put some things into place that enabled that to happen, so they could connect with school and connect then with sense of family. Because one thing, like my daughter's a teacher in that building, she said, I've never learned so much about a kid. Like she's pretty good about interacting, but she'd never thought about asking some of the questions to really get to know them and connect with their home, not just them in the school building. That then leads to the safety, and we have safety where you're physically safe, but then we practice those safety drills. For some, that is actually a trigger for trauma. So we have to be aware of those kind of things too, and prep them. I mean, we had, I remember one little girl we had at Moses couldn't take the fire drill. And so we had to know when the fire drill was happening. And sometimes we just had to leave the building. Other time we were working up to prepping her for it. And by the end, we could get through the fire drill with her hands over her ears. But it was a lot of work in building that routine. And then just feeling supported, encouraging them to take risks and commending them on that. I want you to talk about that one, corrective, but that feeling supported, even I think about an example with my son. And he had just a mental breakdown. He was 16 years old and just had a total breakdown at our house. And I was losing my own, like, I'm like, you're 16. I got into that parent thing. We'll talk about that. Like, what is he doing? And my daughter said, take a deep breath. She goes, it's okay that this is happening. She goes, your hormones and your neurons are firing all at once right now. Just take a deep breath. So she did all of those things for him. And I, as a parent, was like, wow, you're good. But I just forgot in that moment.
So all of these things together need to be together for kids to feel safe. Like we have very safe buildings, right? Even over the last few years, renovated some buildings to make entries more safe. It's locked, you need to be buzzed in, right? But that doesn't necessarily make kids feel safe. And so what we've really learned about this I am safe one, like the example of the fire drill is a good one. Lockdown is another one. Like a lot of our kids don't do well with lockdown, but the two of us could come up with a fabulous plan of how to support a student during lockdown. But odds are, if we didn't have a conversation with the student too, it would fail. Because that's a piece that we miss a lot, is asking the child, what do you need to feel safe? The 4-to-1 positive to corrective goes back to those celebrations on that continuum and how you might have gotten some of these catch them being good. Our goal, and we know through educational research, is that for every time that we correct a student, they need to have 4 positives surrounding that correction. And a correction can even sound super sweet and nice, but if I'm asking you to change your behavior, even if I say, would you please sit down, that's a correction. And so we are working really hard on increasing our positives. Okay, so if Leslie's not sitting, but this gentleman is, and it's nice job, thank you for sitting, I appreciate you sitting so nicely. And then oftentimes Leslie will sit down. The thing that was probably, and it sounds silly, the intervention I started using the most after I read The Connected Child was to correct them or praise them almost right before they do it, right? So if you, oh, thank you for sitting down, and then I'd be so proud, oh my gosh, they're doing it. They're actually doing it. But if you praise them before it happens. So, but sometimes we have to get really creative about what that positive interaction looks like. I was at a conference about a year ago, and they said our students on an IEP, we're looking at 10-to-1 positives that they need to feel supported. Okay, we good? Okay. So looking beyond the behavior. So what do we know about an iceberg? Most of it's underwater. Where's most of the damage happen? Underwater. So when we think about behavior, we think about that's what we can see. That's what happens above the water, right? So if I've got some non-compliance or running out of the classroom or anger, that's just what I can see. But we have to look beyond the behavior. We have to look under the water to see what else might be going on. Okay, so if I have a student that's feeling worthless or is feeling shame, right? And I'm seeing anger up here, I need to know what's going on down here to put in an effective intervention. Okay, so we're looking at what's beyond the behavior and asking, what might this child need? Okay, digging a little deeper.
Oh, yeah. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. We do have this as a handout in more depth. But just thinking about what this might look like in a school setting. I was called once to an elementary school to do an observation of a little guy who was hoarding. He was hoarding and he would hide himself in things. And I walked into the room and right away there was Christmas lights hanging all over the place and blinking. And I asked the teacher some questions about the student, and we came to the conclusion that he was hoarding and hiding because he had no control over all of these lights that continued to flash over his head. So he was having some sensory issues, and that was the only thing he could control, is to take these things and find his space. So it's important to think about those triggers, what might be causing some of those odd behaviors when you're seeing students either overeat, undereat, things like that, your children. There could be something triggering that and some signs. And then this next part is what you might actually see the student or your child do and why they might do that. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. You can kind of look through that, but I think this was really meaningful to me, and it's helpful as a teacher to think about, because if you have a student who can't sleep at night, they tend to sleep in your class in the morning. And so that's helpful. Then again, that's a communication, and it's a lot easier to, if a teacher will be a lot more forgiving if they're aware before. So these are some safety strategies that we can put into place and that we talk to the teachers about as well. I think like appropriate choices. Sometimes I've made the mistake as a parent, like you need to do this or I'm going to do that, and realize that I'm totally overreacting. And so they're also going to overreact. So in the term of like doing homework or doing schoolwork, it might be you can do this page or you can do this page or you can do this problem or you can do this problem. You can make it into a small, tiny piece, but getting out of it is not the option. So depending on their level, and again, like Tracy said, don't do that when they're down here in their downstairs brain. But when they're upstairs brain, you can do some bargaining with them, but be kind and firm. Again, they're not getting out of it. That we talk a lot about, you don't reward them through escape. So they still have to be accountable for what the work is, and they'll thank you for it. And then the provide an out. I think this is really big. And as a classroom teacher, it was helpful to notice things about kids, what was going to trigger them. I can start seeing when a student by fidgeting or what's going to start it. So I used to have just an envelope on my desk, and I could see like little Bobby's getting kind of antsy, and I take the envelope, can you run to the office? That way it gets him out of the room, because I can see that Jimmy John was getting on his nerves, gets him out of the room, he can take a deep breath, and it's not calling out his behavior in any way. And he has time. So, obviously that's taught before, we know, and like you asked, do we leave them in rooms, or, there's usually levels. And especially as they get into middle school and high school, this is a safe space. And so there's places they can go without asking permission, without calling attention, but allows them to take those deep breaths without calling in front of their friends.
So offering appropriate choices sometimes makes us in education very nervous. Okay, it can make us very nervous, but the choices are always two that are okay with the adult. So whether it's you at home or us at school, like we would never say, would you like to do your math? Because our expectation is you're going to do math. And that's a big learning piece for a lot of teachers. If you ask a question that can be answered with yes or no, then be ready to accept no, right? So offering choices that are always, always okay with the adult. And then providing an out. Anybody in here ever back yourself into a corner and you weren't sure how you're going to get out? Right? I think I already did it 3 times today. So with kids, we have to remember they need a way to get out. And sometimes they really do back themselves in a corner. And how do they get out while still saving face? So that's kind of our job at school, is to give them opportunity to get themselves out of that corner while saving face.
That last week I was at a high school, and the dean of students was talking about how she had a student who is chronically sick but not really sick and doesn't like to go to gym, and so she had went into the office and said, oh, let's check your temperature. So she validated her, like made her feel safe, and then she's like, I'm not feeling anything. She's like, I'm not feeling a temperature. She's like, it's only 8. Maybe you just need to get your energy up. Are you feeling like you're a little low? Like maybe PE, that would really help. What do you think about that? And so she had the conversation, and she's like, well, how about you go to PE and then come back and you check out with me later? And the kid up off the table and went. And she, afterwards, the principal or the dean was reflecting. She goes, I felt ridiculous because she clearly wasn't sick. And I go, but you validated her. And because you validated her, she went to class. Whereas if you would have sat and argued with her, she'd still be sitting in there. So just took her 1 minute of time to have that conversation.
And all of these strategies are important. We just knew we didn't have time to talk about all of them. So we're just highlighting a few. So being approachable, like just being open and letting youth know it's okay to come talk to you about things. And I think it also goes to this one. I got this slide because Tara didn't want to say this word. Avoid catastrophizing. Okay, so a lot of these kids, we have to keep coming back to size of the problem, because they tend to think things are a big, big, big problem, but we have to explain a big problem would be the building on fire, right? Is this a big problem? Is it a little problem? But the other thing about being approachable, and I learned this as a parent, I had to be so careful how many questions I asked, right? When our kids would start opening up and talking about something, I'd realize if I asked too many questions, or if my husband asked too many questions, they'd shut down, right? So kind of on their terms, they start talking, just be a really good reflective listener. And then honor emotions and respect their life story. So that's one thing we really work on with kids, especially with that second step program, is understanding feelings, and that all feelings are okay. All feelings are okay, but it's how we manage and cope with our feelings that we maybe need to work on. Okay, do you want us to wrap up? So I think we should watch this video though, and then we can wrap up. This connects to trauma can be harmful, but we can always rewire that brain. Okay, so she sums it up. Next time you guys might want to just invite her. She wraps up the whole thing that we've been talking about. So serve and return, right, in the first 5 years. But here's the thing that we know from research is that that brain can be rewired. So even if you're working with a child who's older than 5, we can still do serve and return, right? Connecting, interacting, and play. It's so, so, so important.
So this is just that teach, reteach again. I don't want to read it all, but being that active listener, recognizing and understanding the emotion, and then help them through the problem solving. Did we lose the meeting? Oh, we lost the meeting. So in our school district, like as Tracy talked about earlier, we have second step. So that is the curriculum that we use, pre-K
they use it in VII? Just okay. So pre-K or K through 8, and then in the high school we use resilience for youth. At the high school level, admittedly, we're not as good about the teach and reteach, but it's before that, 8th grade and below, it's very embedded in the teacher's language throughout when they're working on academic skills as well. So that's really the goal, is that we can help them balance their emotions so that we can get to some academic work, because you have to be safe to be working.
Okay, so this is just one piece of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so a lot of the students that we've worked with that have experienced trauma, they tend to think very negatively about themselves and about the world. And so what we try to bring us back to are thoughts impact feelings, impact behavior. Okay, so here's just an example. So let's say I'm in the lunchroom and I walk up to this group of girls and they're laughing, right? I walk up and they're laughing. The laughing is the trigger. Okay, if I walk up and they're laughing, what might I think? They're making fun of me. And if I think that they're making fun of me, how might I feel? Sad, right? Angry. And if I'm sad or angry, what might I do? Yeah, I might say something back that's really not nice, right? Or I might do something that's not appropriate. So I think they're laughing at me. I feel hurt. I make a poor choice. Okay, but what if I walk up to this table and they're laughing? What else might I think? Right? I might think somebody made a joke, right? And if I think, well, maybe somebody said a joke, what might I feel? Might be curious, right? If I missed, and if I'm curious, what might I do? Hey, what's so funny? So you see the difference? Your thinking impacts your feeling, impacts your doing. But this is what we'll hear a lot from students. Well, they looked at me, right? And then they go down this negative route of thoughts. And so what we try to do is get kids to flip that thinking. Okay, you thought something negative happened. What else might have happened?
So to get students and children to be thinking about that, we are the adult in the situation. So the image that Tracy showed you, we also go through that as adults. And especially if our student or our child is up here or in their downstairs brain, we start to go back into our downstairs brain as well. And so we're experiencing that same cycle of emotion as they are. The difference is that we should be able to get ourselves into some regulated thinking so that we have time to stop and change our reaction. So as Tracy was saying, that's where we recognize this. So that student might be saying, he's laughing at me, and you're in your head rolling your eyes. He's not laughing at you. Instead of rolling my eyes, I'm going to stop and think, how can I restate that for them? This is the moment that I can change their reaction. This is a tool I do use with teachers quite a bit, because I think we sometimes need to remind them and ourselves that it's not about us at that moment. So this has been a good visual for that. Then in our, to kind of build on that, Tracy talked about our tools for self-regulation. As an adult, I have fidgets everywhere, because otherwise I walk around clicking pens, which is highly annoying to adults in movies or in meetings. So I take a little squishy ball with me. But having spaces available and invitational. So this isn't something you're forced to go to, but this is a place that you can go to. The tools, this is important, especially in middle school, calling them tools versus toys. I think my daughter just recently added a collection, and she said, I'm shocked by how well they treat them. 8th graders. She goes, I thought I'd buy all this stuff and it'd be wrecked in a day. And they actually have started to bring their own donations because it's so important in their class. Allow them the time to think things over. Tracy mentioned this, limit conversation. Sometimes that goes against our instinct. We want to get to the bottom of it. We think they need to hear from us, but sometimes silence is better. and then the waiting, because again, those two things take some patience on our part, because and it's in our instinct to be helpful, and so taking that breath ourselves is important.
Okay, then we'll wrap up with just this last piece on resiliency. So Ann Maston is out of the University of Minnesota, and she's spent, I don't know how many years, 40 plus years researching resilience. And so this is a visual we try to bring back to teachers and other staff often. So the number one resiliency factor, the thing that helps kids and all of us deal with tough stuff, the number one is capable parenting. And I often ask groups, how many of you on a tough day still call mom or dad? Right? Like mom and dad, capable parenting. But if we have a student that hasn't had capable parenting, number two, those other close relationships are so important, whether they're relationships in their home environment or at school or in community. Very much the reason that check in, check out is done by somebody other than the classroom teacher. How many close relationships can we support that child with? And then you can see the rest of these resiliency factors. And so when we think about this, whether it's from a school perspective or a home perspective, like we have the capability to impact all 10 for students.
Piece, and one of the main questions you asked is how to balance. And I think Amber's example she gave me was a student or your child goes to therapy, you have to deal with that after. So there's that calming piece. But then I think we talk about partnering with schools. There might still be some residual effects when they go to school in the morning. That might be something a teacher may, oh, good job, like a heads up, because it does help. So the teacher right away knows that behavior is not about them. Something happened prior. And maybe you've learned now as they build relationships, what's one way to handle that. But I think that is probably the best thing you can do. And it's sometimes instinctual. You get frustrated with teachers and you want to go to the building principal or to right away to the counselor. Well, they don't know your child as well. So the classroom teacher, we would always advocate for as your first point of contact. If you do have the student on an IEP, case managers sometimes know the student a little bit better. You would know more in terms of how their daily schedule is. But this is probably the primary relationship, and this would be the last point of contact. I did put a few links in here that maybe connect some of those things through like Department of Education and DPI, which would be more of those processes and tools for some of that, or conferencing with schools and things like that. So I'll make sure that this gets sent or you have it now so that you can share with everybody. Okay, cool. Yeah, so those are just some tools that can help.
All right. So feel free to stick around a little bit and continue networking if you want as we gather your children. Just a reminder, gather your children. April is, we're going to continue the school topic in April, but from a little different perspective. So if you're coming back next month, you're going to hear more about IEPs, IDs, 504s, ED plans, and there are people in this room who can spit out all the plan things better than I can, like Bethany right there if you have questions. So we'll have a couple Stacy Lieben, school social worker, and Danica Nelson, director of special ed, coming in next month. So that's going to be a great topic too. All right, for those of you who are on the Zoom call, we'll drop the mic at this point. That portion is done. Thanks for being here this evening. We will see you next month.